friends. This is Doug Schmidt, and we are about to begin the second in a series of webinars for my chiropractic friends, pre-approved as indicated on the cover sheet by the Minnesota Chiropractic Board. Last week, Wednesday, also at noon, we did the boundaries presentation, also approved by the Minnesota Chiropractic Board, and that will be for those of you that might have missed it or any friends that you want to share this information with. That will be again replayed on Tuesday, December 6th. 1 week from today, we will be doing the webinar on concussions, new developments in concussions and traumatic brain injuries for chiropractors. I think you're going to find this fascinating. There is some really exciting new information and research out on traumatic brain injuries. One would think that with the strides that we've made in the last 5 years, there would be little new. And I'm going to tell you that my experience with the medical community here in Minnesota is that they're about as far back generally in the dark ages as the doctors were 40 years ago, when we still didn't even know that the football players were suffering from any concussions. But leaving that aside, today is, first of all, if I could introduce myself, I am Doug Schmidt, and I am the president of the Schmidt Law Firm. I've been doing personal injury work for 40 years, and I have been blessed to work with some of the best chiropractors in the state. I have been blessed to have been asked to speak at Northwest University, Health Sciences University. This is the 13th continuing education seminar that I've given for chiropractors over the last 8 or 10 years. Enough about me. We're here to talk about neck and back injuries. And if my 40 years of experience tells me anything, it tells me that the medical community is grossly prejudiced against neck and back injuries. They don't understand it. They're in the dark ages. I find that the chiropractic community, many of you in the chiropractic community, are way light years ahead of some of the medical doctors, especially those that get huge amounts of money from finding nothing wrong with anybody. My experience is that most MDs out there, I'd say 90% of them, just dismiss neck and back injuries as minor soft tissue injuries. That the IME docs all say that most of them, if not all of them, heal within 12 to 14 weeks. They heal without personal disability. And they subscribe to the absolute myth that neck and back injuries don't exist unless there's objective findings. And we'll talk about that myth in a little bit. They believe that subjective pain is irrelevant. Disc injuries are meaningless in the absence of nerve impingement. Totally not true. They are in the dark about ligamentous injuries, about facet joint injuries, and they are living and writing premises that are totally false. They're ignorant of the medical research. Most of them couldn't pass a second grade level of testing on the basic facts relating to soft tissue. Typical IME doc says it's just a soft tissue injury. There wasn't enough car damage to cause any significant injury or disability. You know that's wrong. We know that's wrong. They don't. That there was no objective evidence of injury in the examination. All soft tissue injuries heal within 10 to 14 weeks. They heal without permanent disability. And the bottom line is that your patients and the clients of lawyers that don't understand these basic principles are settling for $3,000 to $8,000 on soft tissue injury cases. And that's why I think we all need to review the basic facts about neck and back injuries, about soft tissue, things that many of you know. Some of it will be reminders. Hopefully, some of this will be new. The medical literature, the reliable medical literature, absolutely establishes that neck and back strain is a predominant injury. 28% of the people treated in emergency rooms after motor vehicle accidents have been diagnosed, even by the medical community that doesn't like the idea of neck and back strain, diagnosed as having neck sprain. 50 respected literature, Carroll, Sterling, and Elliott, 3 different articles, writers who are listed in the bibliography that's at the end of these materials, have confirmed that 50% of whiplash injuries don't ever recover. That's half of them. 50% are left with some residual. And by the way, I am happy to send a copy by email or a hard copy by U.S. mail of the PowerPoint presentations to any of you that are interested. We will be posting this on our Schmidt Law website where you can download it as well. The North American Spine Society has an online publication that I find to be as good a basic ABCs about neck and back injuries as there is. That's found at www.knowyourback.org. And it posts the statement that 1/3 of all whiplash injuries do not recover, are permanent. 10% end up with constant pain, and that's severe constant pain. Another study shows that 42% of whiplash injury acceleration, deceleration patients end up with chronic problems. That's Elliott. So let's go to the basic terminology. I think you all hopefully are familiar with WAD. I'll be using that throughout this presentation. Whiplash associated disorder, or CAD. Foreman and Croft has used both of those terms. Cervical acceleration, deceleration injury, or lumbar whiplash injury, which is a term that we don't see used very frequently. But the medical literature does, in fact, use that term. Many of the writers, lumbar whiplash injury. We think of the whiplash being directed primarily to the cervical spine. Soft tissue injuries are dismissed by the IME doctors as minimal problems, but the medical literature defines soft tissue injuries to include muscles, the myofascial injuries, the sprains, nerve injuries, ligamentous injuries, or the sprains, facet joint injuries that we'll be talking about later, intervertebral disc injuries, the herniations, protrusions, extrusions, bulging, and psychological injuries. Obviously, the term soft tissue injury does not include a bony fracture. Definition of strain is the overstretching of a muscle, which can lead to long-term permanent damage due to petechial scarring, a microscopic scarring in the muscle tissues, as well as nerve damage that we'll be talking about later. Sprain, of course, is the ligament, the tendon, that we all know to be poorly vascularized and not capable of healing itself. We'll be talking about overstretching or plastic deformity of the ligaments that just doesn't recover. There's an interesting article published by the Royal College of Surgeons from Edinburgh and Ireland, which states that despite remodeling or healing, the biomechanical properties of a healed tendon issue never match those of intact tendons. That's permanent damage. And the literature grades the three categories of sprain strain. Grade 1, the primary, which is stretching of the muscles and ligaments. Symptoms tend to be limited to pain and swelling. It's typically a transient condition, and recovery is to be expected. Secondary, grade 2, and the old Minnesota chiropractic standards of care used what's similar to this grading system, and I go back to that as a Bible. Those of you that don't have that, it's been replaced by the Croft standards, but it's a beautiful, beautiful ABCs of diagnosis, history taking, and the rest of what you do as chiropractors. Wonderful, wonderful article. I have copies of that. I'd be happy to supply it to you, even though it's old and not currently being published by the Minnesota Chiropractic Board. It's a wonderful, wonderful document. So, but secondary sprain strain injuries involve more significant swelling, bruising caused by petechial bleeding or microscopic hemorrhaging, often leading to permanent limitation of function. And then we have the tertiary, which is the serious, most serious grade with the actual tearing of the muscles and ligaments. We'll be talking later about how the literature indicates that partial tearing of ligaments can produce almost as much, if not as much, dysfunction or laxity as a partial, as a total tearing. In other words, partial stretching or tearing can leave as much dysfunction of a ligament as a complete tear. It can be that bad. So, we have the Icd-10 codes that are typically used for sprain strain injuries of the cervical spine. You probably know all of these. If you request a copy of these PowerPoints, we could send them to you, and you'll have those. I'm sure hopefully you're using all of those in your practice at the present time. If there's one thing that I see, I want to back up a second. I am going to make a statement that some of you will think is rather bold and out of hand, but I submit to you that I see more records from chiropractors, various chiropractors, than you do, than almost all of you. I have 200 active cases right now, 80% of which are auto accident cases, 80 to 90% of which involve chiropractic care. And so I'm seeing dozens and dozens and dozens of chiropractic records. Part of what I talked about last week in the boundaries presentation is how often I see poor record keeping. I made the bold statement last week that only less than 10% of the chiropractors out there really actually comply rigidly and strictly with the standards of the Minnesota Chiropractic Board about record keeping, about their record keeping rule. And part of that is, I'll be free to admit, that the rule is so stringent that, taken literally, it requires all of the chiropractors to be taking not only a lifetime history of all medical conditions, of all patients, but also a familial history. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, overboard. But nevertheless, setting that aside, there still is a lot of poor record keeping. I see, for example, there are, I see very few chiropractors that are listing the type of trauma code, the V codes, that really literally require you to specify whether you've got a driver or a passenger and whether it's in a SUV hit by a pickup. I think that's overboard too. But the ones that are often missed, there are codes for myofasciitis, for headaches. I see many of my clients that come in that have had bruising, have had cuts, have had injuries that would not typically fall within the purview of your chiropractic treatment, but nevertheless should be documented and recorded. You have somebody come in with bruising. I had a young lady last week, bruising she was a passenger, bruising of the left shoulder, with edema, bruising across her chest from the seat belt. She actually had abrasions on the right side of her neck. She was a passenger. Nothing mentioned about that in the chiropractic record in that case. And that's really important to us personal injury lawyers, because that's a perfect example. That's a case where the driver wrapped a car around a tree and is now claiming that my client, the passenger, was actually driving. And that evidence of those abrasions to the right side of her neck, the bruising across the frontal shoulder and across the chest, are very important evidence. And sad to say, it's not listed in the chiropractic record. Here are some of the codes that can be used for sprain, strain, for whiplash injuries. Many of them neglected and overused, unused. And I point your attention specifically, we're going to be talking about the myofascial pain syndrome, about the facet joint syndrome, other cervical disc disorders. So, here we go. Fact: muscle injuries can result in chronic myofascial pain syndrome with trigger points of pain lasting indefinitely. Some of you out there may know and remember well Seth Rosenbaum, a physiatrist, a physical and rehabilitative medicine doctor. Dr. Seth was absolutely wonderful in charting and documenting the range of motion, charting and documenting edema, and more specifically, trigger points. I've seen chart notes from Dr. Seth that specified the exact location of as many as 22 trigger points in a patient. Wonderful, wonderful evidence. I see some medical doctors recently, I've had experience with medical doctors that are actually doing trigger point injections into the trigger points without ever documenting where they were, just general reference to upper back and scapular area, have done injections, didn't document the number of injections, how many times they needled the patient, or where. That to me is just pretty sad. But going back to chronic myofascial pain syndrome, this is a real live clinical entity that's well documented in the literature. And the Bible is the textbook by Dr. Janet Travell and Dr. Simmons, the Myofascial Pain and Dysfunction Trigger Point Manual. Wonderful, wonderful document. And Foreman and Croft. I keep whiplash injuries, the cervical acceleration, deceleration syndrome. I keep both of those books at my fingertips. I'm going to tell you that the AMA, I'm going to be doing another seminar, another seminar specifically on myofascial pain syndrome to review the literature from Dr. Travell, from Foreman and Croft, from the AMA. AMA specifically recognizes myofascial pain syndrome. What's amazing is I've actually seen board-certified neurologists, many of them from the Minneapolis Clinic, laugh at the concept of myofascial pain syndrome, claim that it doesn't even exist. I happen to be one of the few people, I'll be happy to provide any of you with a copy, but I happen to be one of the few people that still has a copy of the course syllabus from the International Symposium on Myofascial Pain Syndrome that was held and sponsored by the University of Minnesota Medical School, where they invited Dr. Travell and Dr. Simmons as their keynote speaker. I've delighted in cross-examining some of the doctors that claim myofascial trigger point doesn't exist. It's not a valid clinical entity, about the fact that their alma mater, the University of Minnesota Medical School, has held an international symposium inviting doctors from all over the world, from Denmark, from England, from Japan, Australia, and many from the United States and Canada to come and talk about a condition that they are trying to claim doesn't even exist at all. Amazing. So here's what the AMA says about this is in their pain management continuing legal education course materials. Myofascial pain syndrome is a condition of mild to severe muscle pain associated with trigger points. The pain is typically localized, often to a single muscle. Well, I disagree with that. It's typically to many muscles, singularly, each taken singularly. Often, commonly follows muscle overload, such as may occur with an acute injury. For a long time, I had a hard time understanding the interplay between facet joint injuries, intervertebral disc injuries, and myofascial pain syndrome, and ligamentous injuries. And it's now pretty clear to me, it may be clear to all of you, but here's the overall big picture. We all know that the spine gets its structural integrity from vertebrae, from intervertebral discs, and from the ligaments that hold that whole column together, as well as, secondarily, the paravertebral muscles and the various muscles of the spine. When the whiplash injury occurs and the ligament is overstretched, the structural integrity of the spine is compromised, and now the muscles are working overload to make up for that support that God intended the ligaments would supply. And it's the overload of the muscles working to make up for that ligamentous laxity that produces the trigger points of pain. As the AMA guide says, it follows muscle overload such as may occur with acute injury, and I would add to that, such as may occur with chronic laxity, producing chronic myofascial pain syndrome. Postural muscles are often affected. Pain can wax and wane. It's usually always present and at times can be severe. So what's the assessment? Trigger points of the diagnostic feature. They come, as Foreman and Croft would say, either in hard nodules or in which are called trigger points, or taut bands, which are elongated trigger points. You sometimes find the local twitch as a characteristic symptom or sign of the trigger point. Myofascial pain often involves the posterior neck, the low back, the shoulders, and the chest. Chronic pain is often referred to other muscles in a non-characteristic, sometimes a non-characteristic pain referral pattern. Well, one thing I think it is important to note that often the trigger points in the low back can mimic sciatica. That's an interesting point. As can, as you all know, a piriformis syndrome that we may be talking about later as well. Fact: recent research data has demonstrated structural muscle changes in patients with whiplash. Now, we've all known this basic premise that permanent injury to the muscles is caused by the petechial or microscopic scarring that doesn't heal with healthy tissue. But the new research is showing, and a substantial body of it, that there are noticeable, observable, objective evidence of motor, muscle, and neurosensory changes following whiplash, including loss of movement, altered muscle recruitment patterns, and morphological changes, particularly in the neck muscles. And the Sterling article is, if there's one from the bibliography, I think there's 40, 50 articles that I've got in the bibliography here. The one that you might find most interesting, I think, would be Sterling. The Davis article is quite comprehensive and good as well. But biomechanical research has proven that the muscles injured in whiplash trauma do not always heal. Recent research shows evidence of structural changes. And these findings can be found only in patients with chronic whiplash symptoms, providing the proof that they are trauma-related. And in particular, the Elliott article talks about pathological findings of fatty muscle infiltration in the neck extensor muscles of patients with chronic whiplash that have been detected actually using MRI. Muscle fatty infiltration providing objective evidence of the injury. So here we go. The next fact: whiplash trauma can result in permanent nerve damage that can cause damage to the dorsal root ganglion, resulting in hypersensitivity, peripheral nerve injury, followed by change in the expression of the neurotransmitters, the neuromodulators, and in primary afferent neurons located in the dorsal root ganglion of the cervical spine. Davis points out, one of my favorite articles, points out that traumatic injury of the peripheral nervous system often leads to persistent pathological pain states, leading to a permanent rewiring of the pain pathways from the peripheral nerve to the brain. You know, a lot of this that I'm talking about today is just a general understanding of the anatomy and how it works, and may not be totally helpful to you chiropractors doctors of chiropractic in your day-to-day practice and how you treat the patient, but it is absolutely vital when it comes to supporting your patients in a litigation setting, in a personal injury claim, to be able to explain in a narrative medical report or in on the witness stand what's going on. And this evidence, scientific evidence, that the nerve pathways, the peripheral nerve pathways actually get permanently rewired, is a very, very significant concept to that, to the understanding of a personal injury claim, a whiplash claim. So I see often that the two things that sometimes, two conditions that sometimes are overlooked but important, are the cervical brachial syndrome. I've listed the ICD code there. Condition involving a combination of spasm, pain, numbness, weakness, and swelling in the region of the neck and shoulders. You often, I know you all find so often the shoulder being involved with the neck and upper thoracic. And then the thoracic outlet syndrome. Again, the ICD-10 code there is G540, is the result of pressure of a nerve bundle in the neck that goes between the collarbone and the rib, caused by spasm of the splenic muscle or a congenital misplacement of the muscle into the first rib. It'd be a big deal, causing numbness and dysfunction throughout the upper extremity. There it is. There's how it goes. And while this is very significant, it's also equally significant how the vertebral artery goes up through the axis, right through the bony part of the axis and the atlas, causing vertebral artery syndrome, which I have not included and should in the future include in this presentation. Thoracic outlet syndrome is a result of pressure of the nerve bundle in the neck between the collarbone and rib caused by spasm of the splenic muscle, congenital misplacement of the muscle. Symptoms are weakness, tingling, numbness of the arm and a portion of the hand, as well as heaviness of the upper extremities and headaches. Many patients with whiplash do not respond to conventional therapy, and doctors often overlook or misdiagnose traumatic thoracic outlet syndrome as a congenital problem when it's not. We all know the basic facts of how a hyperflexion, hyperextension of the cervical spine works, and how the phases, I haven't shown the different phases of the hyperflexion, hyperextension, but we know that the seat back, when the car is rear-ended, pushes the torso ahead, our chest and upper back ahead, the head snaps back and then forward, causing really a three-part phase in the whiplash. I find that well over half of my clients, when I take the initial history, well over half of my clients that have been in a moderate to severe car accident tell me, when I ask them how their body was tossed around in the crash, tell me that it went forward first, when we know by the laws of physics that that's not possible at all. And the point there is that it happens so fast that they're unaware of the three parts, the forward thrust of the upper torso, the backward hyperextension of the neck, and the followed by the rebound hyperflexion. And again, we know the ligaments have poor vascular blood supply and don't heal well. And when they are stretched beyond their anatomical limit, they suffer plastic deformity. They stay stretched permanently, just like the plastic holders on a six-pack of Coke or beer. When you pull the can out, the plastic is stretched. It doesn't go back like a rubber band. And that's what happens to the ligaments in a whiplash injury. Ligamentous injury causes spinal instability. The ICD, I've got the Icd-10 code. Bad boy here. I've got to get the 10 in for you. Whiplash injury to the anterior spinal structures of the lower cervical spine. The literature, I trust you're aware, the literature shows that the ligamentous injuries tend to focus on the C4-5 and the C5-6 joints, producing instability in extension, axial rotation, and lateral bending. All three grades of strain leave the ligament with can leave the ligament with permanent body damage. No treatment currently consists to restore an injured tendon or ligament to its normal condition. It's a permanent problem. You can't go in and squeeze that overly stretched ligament back into the shape that God gave it. Despite healing, the biomechanical and mechanical properties of the healed tendon never match those of intact tendons. The most commonly, the literature says that the most commonly injured structures in a whiplash injury are the facet capsule, the intervertebral disc, and the upper cervical ligaments. Now, I'm going to tell you that we're going to be talking a little bit more about, in the future, about the aspects of the facet capsule injury. I see a lot of lawyers out there that think they're experts about facet joint injuries, and when I ask them, well, what is the facet joint injury? What part of the facet is injured? They go, well, it's the facet joint. Excuse me. No, that's like saying a knee injury is the knee injury rather than the ACL or the meniscus or whatever. And they're unable to explain that we've got synovial capsules, we've got the capsular facet ligaments, and so forth, the cartilage, so forth. We'll talk about that. Here's a point that I always try to get across to the juries, and I think it's a very important one. Many of the injuries that I see and handle and you treat are the result of the problem that we have with the three-point shoulder lap belt. They save lives, but they increase the incidence of spinal injuries. They increase the injury potential because, number one, they restrain the torso, allowing the head and neck whip to be more violent because the torso to which the head and neck are attached is held constant and doesn't move with the head. More whip. And secondly, and maybe even more important, the restraint is unilateral to only, because it's a three-point, to only the one shoulder and not the other, causing a rotational force, which is well known in the literature to be significantly problematic, a significant cause of more increased injury. In other words, the rotational aspect produces more injury than there would be by far if we did not have the rotational aspect of it. So we have the connective tissue bridges between the muscle and dura and the upper cervical spine, involving the first cervical vertebrae. As it moves on the axis, atlas moves on the axis, and we all know that over 90% of the rotation of the head and neck involves the rotation between the atlas and the axis. We have the connection with the skull, the rectus capitis posterior major, the dura mater, the connective tissue bridge that Dr. Hack talks about. Here is an illustration of the damage that is done to internally to the cervical ligaments when they're stretched beyond their anatomical limit, when they're overstretched, and it results in plastic deformity. The straight fibers here are normal cervical ligament fibers, and over here the crazy, contorted, twisted fibers are the result of the plastic deformity, leading to permanent destruction of the ligament. That's a wonderful, wonderful illustration. I use that in court every time. Subfailure. Here's the term. Subfailure, stretch only, without a complete tear, is known by biomechanical research to be a significant problem. It causes damage of the ligaments, which can be equal to that of having no ligamentous support whatsoever. Partial injury can result in laxity equivalent to a completely compromised ligament. The Journal of Biomechanics recently reported that whiplash trauma causes damage to the Aller ligaments in 66% of the whiplash victims. The result is motion segment impairment. And we've got over here the translational impairment. This is a figure from these figures come from the AMA guides. And we have over here on the left the translational abnormality, and you know that as anterolisthesis and retrolisthesis. The literature says that if the translation add the millimeters of anterolisthesis to the retrolisthesis, if they add up to 3.5 millimeters, you've got a 25% permanent impairment to the spine just on that basis alone. Anything over 1 millimeter of translation is considered by the literature to be, Panjabi and White's textbook, for example, to be abnormal. And then we go on the left figure, excuse me, the right figure, to the angular motion. Any angular irregularity is typically a disruption of the George's line. That all know that concept. If you have gapping, angular gapping at one level of more than 7 degrees, you've got an irregularity or an abnormality according to literature. And anything over 11 degrees is a 25, constitutes a 25% permanent impairment according to the AMA guides to the evaluation of permanent impairment. Foreman and Croft recognized both of these concepts, recognized up above the translational abnormality and down below the angular abnormality many years ago, as long as 1995 in that wonderful textbook that I keep at my fingertips. Digital motion X-ray has been proven to be a valuable diagnostic tool to analyzing the amount of translation as well as the amount of angular deformity due to ligamentous damage in the cervical spine. Those of you that have not worked with digital motion X-ray, I think you would find it just fascinating to see the movement as shown on a video X-ray of the cervical spine. And that would be the subject of another hour. I think I've given a presentation on digital motion X-rays and ligamentous damage before, and propose to do that again probably after the first of the year. So here we go. Disc pain is the cause of chronic pain and permanent impairment in many cases, even without herniation or nerve impingement. Here we got another point where the IME doctors just don't get it. They don't understand that a herniated disc that is not bulging or extruding, is not pressing on one of the peripheral nerves coming out of the spine, can still be the source of significant pain. The English study that was reported 15, 20 years ago in Lancet, the English version of the American counterpart of the American Medical Journal, documented pathology findings showing the ingrowth of nerves into the cracks, into the annular tears in the disc that were done on autopsy of patients that corresponded to the clinical findings of pain that had been documented in the patient's medical records before their death and before the autopsy. It's a given fact. The North American Spine Society says that disc pain is the major cause of chronic pain in about 25% of the patients. And then Jenkins and Fremont, and I can give you a list of half a dozen more respected medical authors that have confirmed that disc pain is the cause, can be the cause of chronic pain, even where no actual nerve impingement, where it's not pressing on a disc. We're getting close to the end of the time. I'm going to speed this up a little bit. And again, you can get copies of this to read and peruse as you wish. Anyway, we see radial annular fissures. They're a tearing that begins within the center of the disc and progresses outward. Circumferential annular fissures are splitting a part of the annulus fibrosus between the rings, and often the result of repetitive microtrauma on the annulus. I'm going to rush through the definitions of disc bulging. I trust that you know it. I am going to tell you that even in the last several years, I have seen and heard neurologists, board-certified neurologists, claim that there are no commonly accepted definitions of what is a bulge, what is an extrusion, what is a protrusion, what is a herniation. And that is just absolutely poppycock. Protrusion is where the base is less than 25 of the circumference, and protrusions are called focal. Protrusions with 25 to 50% of the circumference of the disc are broad-based. The definition of a protrusion is where the base the depth is less than the base. So basically, it's wider than it is deeper. And the extrusion is when it's deeper than it is wider on the same plane. Oops, here we go. Whiplash trauma is known to cause accelerated degeneration of the intervertebral disc. I have known that. I've known that for 40 years, 30 years. Chiropractic friends have been telling me that whiplash injury causes accelerated degeneration. It wasn't until perhaps the last 5 years in my career that I realized how significant a problem that was. I kind of thought, well, it's long-term slow aging or degeneration that occurs following a whiplash injury. More recently, now that I have had the benefit of digital motion X-ray, and again, I've had over 100 of my clients digital motion X-rayed. And of that 100, roughly 30 of them have had enough ligamentous laxity to justify a 25% impairment of using the AMA guide of the cervical spine. Seeing that laxity, in several cases, a number of cases, I've circled back and had my clients re-imaged with MRIs showing dramatic changes in their the condition of their intervertebral discs in the course of just 2 years. One of them reported, and if you, I'm happy to send you a copy of my booklet on the diagnosis and proof of cervical ligamentous injuries. There's a case study reported in there, and it's Bruce's study. Bruce is somebody that had an MRI 2 or 3 months after his accident that showed he's a 45-year-old carpenter, a laborer, showed some generalized degeneration of the kind that you would expect from a laborer, but nothing focal, nothing specific. The digital motion X-ray showed major damage to his ligamentous spine. We circled back 2.5 years later and did another MRI, and his cervical spine was riddled with herniations, actually with spurring. You couldn't believe that it was the same patient. Just absolutely amazing. In fact, whiplash doesn't cause stenosis, but it makes stenosis symptomatic. You all know that. That's a pretty basic principle. Pain from facet joint injury is the primary cause of chronic pain lasting more than 1 year in 60% of the cases of people having that chronic pain lasting 1 year. Facet joint injury. The North American Spine Society says facet joint pain is the most common cause of chronic neck pain after a car accident. Facet joint syndrome. The study by Mirsky and Bogduk says that 50% of all chronic spinal pain sufferers have facet joint involvement. Condition of inflammation, degeneration that results from the injury to the facet joint, typically the synovial capsule, as well as the facet ligaments and nerves causing pain. Icd-10 diagnosis code M53.85. Referred pain into the upper extremities, chest wall, and head, often permanent, as documented by Manchikanti. Recently, there's an organization called the ATASA that provides expert witnesses, and just recently I've stumbled onto the fact that they have a training seminar about conducted by head of the physical medicine department of the University of Kansas that has a wonderful description about cervical facet syndrome, which he describes as a syndrome of head, neck, and shoulder and proximal extremity pain, largely in non-dermatomal distribution, usually dull and ill-defined, worsened by flexion and extension, lateral bending, usually with no motor or sensory deficits, but as emphasized here in the bottom, can be the cause of severe pain, can be effectively treated with facet injections, RFN injections, which I'm skipping through this again, are well accepted and recognized by the medical community, top medical colleges throughout the United States. I want to emphasize one thing to my chiropractic friends, and it's right here, number 2. One thing that RFN treatment does that works in co-management with the chiropractors, the physical therapists, it allows for pain relief in the facet joint, which then allows for more active rehabilitation and therapy, which can have a significant effect, positive effect on the patient. So, a bit about lumbar whiplash. And I want to talk just briefly, we're just running out of time here. Lap belts contribute to the lumbar whiplash because they secure the lumbar spine at the level of the belt only, allowing the segments of the cervical spine above and below to move in translation, to move in anterolisthesis and retrolisthesis. Piriformis syndrome is something we all need to be familiar with and keep our eyes out for. Depression is, so many IME doctors are saying, well, this is just a depressed person, it's just a whiner. No. Depression is caused by whiplash injury. We're finding that 60% of the whiplash victims have suffered a concussion injury that's been mostly overlooked. The concussion syndrome will be the subject of the webinar that we'll be giving 1 week from today. It's missed by emergency room doctors time and time again. And what's really interesting is the North American Spine Society acknowledges that the symptoms of a whiplash injury are very common to those of a traumatic brain injury. I am going to shut this down. We're at our 1-hour time period. I welcome any of you to get copies of the, just ask for a copy of the PowerPoints. I think you'll find some of this to be interesting reading. I thank you for listening to me. I hope that I know that you share the passion that I share for coming to the assistance of those people that have been many times seriously injured by whiplash injuries with a life-altering functional impairment. By phone number is 952-473-4530. I think you can find our website, and you can get copies. Here's the bibliography. I thank you much, and have a great day. Bye-bye.